Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 74. Onward. The first book today is Peter the Great, His Life and World by Robert K. Massey, 1980. Wow. This book has 855 pages, an incredible book. Peter the Great was the Tsar of Russia, or basically the king of Russia, from 1689 to 1725. So this is going way back. This is almost 300 years ago. So Peter loved war. He loved the ocean, ships, and the West, meaning Western Europe. He modernized Russia. He fought Sweden, the Turks, and the Persians, which is now Iran. He gained access to the Baltic Sea for Russia by fighting Charles XII and Sweden. He built St. Petersburg on the Baltic Sea, which became the new capital of Russia. He also, very tragically, had his son Alexis basically executed for treason. That was very sad. Peter worked hard to make Russia a better country. He had a lot of energy. He drank too much. His first wife's name was Eudoxia. They didn't get along. And his second wife was Catherine. This is a very interesting book. There's a quote by Peter the Great. Quote, "My critics do not know the circumstances I was in at the beginning of my reign. How many people opposed my designs, counteracted my most useful projects, and obliged me to be severe. But I never treated anyone cruelly or gave proof of tyranny. On the contrary, I have always asked the assistance of such of my subjects as have shown marks of intelligence and patriotism, and who, doing justice to the rectitude of my intentions, have been disposed to second them. Without loss of a single instant, we devote all our energies to work." Peter had a traumatic childhood. There was, there was a lot of. This is a royal family, and Russia was, you could say, there was a lot of violence in the culture. And there was an incident when he was very young where there was bloodshed. The thing is, there was a lot of conniving for power, and there was this incident when a lot of people were killed. And I think there were these, what was the name of these guys? These palace soldiers who went on a rampage. Anyway, so this was tough on him, all this traumatic experience when a lot of people were murdered when he was a boy in Moscow. And, growing up, he loved the military. That was his bent. And he loved the ocean. And actually, he helped develop the Russian Navy, or created the Russian Navy. In fact, they had no navy. In fact, they had no ocean coastline before Peter the Great. So his interest was war, and he expanded Russia, as I mentioned earlier. And Charles XII of Sweden was a great power at that time, actually controlled what's now Sweden and also what's now parts of Russia and into the Baltic states. And, Peter added Estonia, what became Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Latvia was his window to the West, and real interesting life. He was trying to modernize Russia, kind of a backward country. He ordered these nobles to have all their beards cut off. He thought those beards were sort of a symbol of, backward thinking. And he spent a lot of time in the West, or Western Europe, traveling and trying to learn, because he knew his country needed to develop, and it wasn't keeping up with what was going on in Western Europe. Now, the thing with his son, he had this son who was kind of lazy and actually not very pro-Russian. He was more pro-German, and he was not. He became under the influence of some conservative Orthodox priests, and Peter, was worried about what would happen, and then eventually they did not get along. His son didn't have his energy and really wasn't interested in continuing the modernization of Russia. And so at one point he fled to the West and was even... it was very, very sad at how it all turned out and how his son died. Not exactly executed, although tortured. So it was very sad, the death of his son. He was Peter the Great had so much energy. He was a very tall guy. I think he was like 6'5", real tall, big guy. Had all kinds of energy and did an awful lot of good for his country, for Russia, and helping Russia to evolve and become more modern and more progressive. And so, this is a fascinating book, real long, and very important person in history. Peter the Great, fascinating book. The next book is Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman, by Robert K. Massey, 2011. This book has 576 pages. Wow, what a book. Catherine the Great lived from 1729 to 1796, and she's considered the greatest queen of Russia, or, Tsarina. And the thing is, she was German. She wasn't even Russian. Catherine the Great was a German princess who came to Russia at age 14 to marry Peter III, the grandson of Peter the Great. She loved Enlightenment books, corresponded with Voltaire, she corresponded with Frederick the Great, Marie Antoinette, John Paul Jones, the father of the U.S. Navy. Her marriage, she ended up marrying the man who became the Tsar, and her marriage was very unhappy. Her husband, Peter III, was actually not a good guy. He was pretty lazy and crazy. And as Tsar, he was going to put her in a convent and divorce her and remarry, because it was an arranged marriage, because she was from a royal family. So she learned about this, that he was going to and she spent her time. She had this. It was a very loveless marriage before her husband became Tsar. She was he ignored her, he mistreated her, and she spent her time reading. She learned Russian language, she made friends, she became very knowledgeable. And when this crisis came, when her husband became Tsar, and he thought, well, now I have power, so I'm going to divorce my wife and put her in a convent. And she didn't want that. That would be like being a slave. So there was a power struggle at that time, and she won. So it's very interesting. Here she's a foreigner, she's an outsider, but people respected her because she was a good person. She was respectful to others, and actually her husband was not popular. He was not a good guy, and in this power struggle, her husband was killed, and she assumed the throne. Fascinating. And here she's a German, not even a Russian. During her time, and she had power for the rest of her life. She had many lovers, including Gregory Potemkin, from the famous expression, a Potemkin village, when you try something that's not real, it's sort of an illusion. Gregory Potemkin had built these sort of fake villages to impress some people. Catherine the Great led Russia in war against the Ottoman Empire and gained Russian access to the Black Sea, including the Crimea, which is kind of like the vacation. Well, now it's in Ukraine, although the Russians took it back. It's their vacation area where they go to a warm area on the ocean. She bought Denis Diderot, the author of the Encyclopedia, his personal library, and let him keep it till his death. And people you've heard the word encyclopedia. Well, the first encyclopedia was compiled by this French guy, Denis Diderot, and he was having financial problems late in life. And he decided to sell his personal library, and she learned about this, and she was interested in learning. That's why she was Catherine the Great. And then she made this wonderful arrangement. She said, well, I'll buy your library, and then she let him keep it till his death. Wasn't that nice? And then, of course, eventually the Russians got all those books. Catherine built a big statue of Peter the Great in St. Petersburg. Her son Paul succeeded her but was assassinated. After the horrors of the French Revolution, Catherine suppressed the Enlightenment books in Russia. She was a good woman, endured a lot of hard times, read a lot of good books, and was a great Russian leader. Really interesting. Yes, so she was interested in bringing change to Russia, but the thing is, the Enlightenment had led to, actually the deaths of the King and Queen of France, and of course she didn't want that to happen to her. And she thought, well, if the Russians become too interested in these ideas, they'll maybe question the legitimacy of her rule, of having a royal family in power in Russia. So that was kind of sad, but this is the reality of power. So this is a fascinating book. It's amazing that the greatest queen of Russia was German. Really amazing. It just shows, the power of education and the power of character. She was a good person, and that's why she won that power struggle. That the different individuals who had power, when the power struggle came, a fight for power with her husband, who should have been the czar, but he was no good, even though he was the legitimate leader. They had this power struggle, and she won because people respected her, and she was a good person, and she did an awful lot of good for Russia. And there are these two great Russian leaders, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. And Peter the Great was her inspiration. So this is a fascinating book, and I really enjoyed it and highly recommend it. The next book is Lenin, a Biography by Robert Service, 2000. Well, you can see I read 3 biographies of famous Russian leaders. Now, this book has 494 pages. It's the life of Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, also known as Lenin, who lived from 1870 to 1924, the father of the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union. Lenin grew up in the Volga River region in Russia. He was part Jewish and a minor nobility. His father was an educator who died when Lenin was 16. His older brother, Alexander, was involved in a plot to murder the Tsar and was arrested and executed. So that was pretty hard. Lenin was a good student and became devoted to the anti-capitalist ideas of Karl Marx. In 1917, during the political chaos caused by the First World War and all the sufferings in Russia, famine especially, the Tsar abdicated power. And actually that was the end of the Romanov royal family's rule in Russia. And Lenin and the Bolsheviks took power. The Bolsheviks was a political party that he was, a major leader in. We're basically communist. Now, the thing about Lenin is he was amoral. He did not believe in morality. He did not have a sense of you got to do what's right, doing the right thing. In fact, there was one of the debates they had, which I think was the downfall of the Russian Revolution. That someone said, well, this isn't right. This is immoral, what you're talking about. And Lenin said morality was irrelevant. So Lenin believed he was creating an ideal society, and it was okay to terrorize people and be brutal to achieve his aims. He was deluded. He worked too much, he actually developed depression, became sick, and died after 7 years in power. Joseph Stalin succeeded him. Lenin's government was worse than the Romanov dynasty. Yeah, when I read the part when he, as an older man, when he developed depression, I thought, oh, so you're depressed after all the suffering that you inflicted on the Russian and other Soviet peoples. Because actually Lenin had spent time in Siberia as a political prisoner, but he had not been, actually had a pretty good life. He was like in a house, he had books to read. It's just that he wasn't allowed to live in the West, in St. Petersburg or Moscow. But when he had power and sent his political enemies to Siberia, it was completely different. And the Soviet Union was just so cruel and took everything away from the Russian and the other ethnic peoples in the Soviet Union. And they took everything away. They took religion away. They really took away education. The people were indoctrinated. And so I thought, oh, now, and they had all this enormous political prison system, the Gulag Archipelago, where millions were arrested for very trivial things. And the whole point was to terrorize the people, to be completely obedient. So people would be so scared that they would whatever the government did, they would follow, no matter how crazy it was. And that's what they did. And so I thought when he developed depression as an older man, I thought, well, this is what you deserve, because it's just horrible. There was a funny story when he was driving. He thought, oh, I'm so great, I'm Lenin, this tremendous person. So he was always in a hurry going places. And he had a driver. He was telling the driver to drive faster. And at one point there was a chicken in the road. And the driver slowed down so the chicken could get out of the way. And, Lenin was real mad about that. But the driver said, no, I'm not going to run over that chicken, just because you're in a hurry. So in a way, he was defying Lenin. So Lenin's the father of the Soviet Union, the first leader of the Soviet Union when Russia changed, became the Soviet Union, became this communist country where the government obtained vast power, overwhelming power to decide whatever they wanted to do, and then go ahead and do it. And then the whole world was the propaganda was, oh, we're creating an ideal society, we're a brotherhood where there's no poverty and you don't have rich people with too much and the poor suffering, so everyone's has a good life in the Soviet Union, and then the whole world should be communist. It was the greatest fraud in world history. A lot of people outside of Russia, in America and Europe, thought they believed the propaganda. They thought, oh, look what the Russians are doing. We should do what they're doing. So this, it just shows the communist propaganda is extremely seductive and attractive and horrific, absolutely horrible. Tremendously evil. Because they take away religion. In fact, they end up having Lenin being worshipped. Lenin was worshipped, and Stalin was worshipped. Eliminate Jesus Christ or saints of different religions, so that people just worship the government and believe in and so you end up remove religion, and then instead of that you worship the government and believe in the government, and so it's a war on the family, a war on everything, on culture, on history, on education. An absolute total disaster. So I think the United States played a noble role in the 20th century fighting communism, and it's still an issue today. And in the Philippines, the communist movement is still influential, and people are still attracted to it because it all sounds good. It appeals to idealistic people who really feel sorry for the suffering of the poor and want a better world. But this is not a better world what they created. And this Lenin guy was one of the most evil men in history, in my opinion. Those who are pro-communist are still people. There are American leftists who want they want the U.S. government to become tremendously powerful, it's actually on the way, so they can achieve what they believe these noble ambitions, like save the environment, fight global warming, help the poor, and all these different wonderful things. That and the only catch is that Americans will lose their freedom, become slaves of the government. I think they'd also like to eliminate religion. The same thing. So it's an ongoing issue, even though the Soviet Union ended, but the same reasons for people for countries to become communist exist. So this is a really amazing book, and it's actually very depressing. But it just shows, we have to fight this. We can't just let things like this happen. And we have to be smarter. We can't just say, oh, look at this. This sounds really, really good. Because back in the 1920s and 30s, Americans thought, wow, the Russians are creating an ideal world, and they were not. So anyway, the next book is Toussaint Louverture, a biography by Madison Smart Bell, 2007. This is an interesting book. We're finally out of Russia. This is Toussaint Louverture is the father of Haiti, the small country in the Caribbean, which is the western third of the island of Hispaniola, which it shares with the Dominican Republic, or La Republicana Dominicana. Toussaint Louverture was born in 1743 and died in 1803. I thought this was a very interesting book. Louverture helped transform the French colony of Saint-Domingue, with brutalized African slaves cultivating sugarcane, into the independent Black Republic of Haiti. Louverture faced many political complications: the French Revolution and its declaration of the equality of man, conflicts among whites, the rich versus the poor, mulatto resentment of white racism, yet their own anti-black attitude, and the suffering of the Africans in Haiti. Eventually, Napoleon Bonaparte, who became the leader of France, sent the French army. Toussaint was captured and died in France. Very sad. He led the only successful slave rebellion in history. Slavery ended in Haiti. Toussaint Louverture is an inspiration. He was brave, smart, kind, just, and realistic. Well, and the thing is that's tragic is Haiti did become independent in 1804. In the Western Hemisphere, which is North and South America, the United States became the first independent country in 1783. fighting the British for independence. And then Haiti, which was a French colony in the Caribbean, became independent in 1804. But up till now, Haiti is this very poor country and really struggled with political problems and very poor materially. And they've, you could say, the legacy of their history is still sort of a curse. You know, the suffering of slavery, and then they have not been able to develop a good government, and so it's. But this is it's a very interesting story, and it was very sad. And actually Haiti was really you could say mistreated by the United States, which was really concerned. They thought, oh my, because American slavery went on till 1865. And Haiti was independent in 1804, and they thought this terrified Americans who thought, oh my God, you know that, and American slaves did know about the Haitian Revolution, where a situation in which the slaves rose up, and all the white people in that area in Saint-Domingue either left or were killed, and the slaves took power. But they've really struggled ever since them and their descendants to develop good government, and because it's been really tough. But so the U.S. really was kind of hard. It ignored that country. It was sort of isolated from the international community because slavery was continuing. There was slavery still in Cuba and so forth. So this is a very Toussaint Louverture, one of the most important people in history, and you could say the George Washington of Haiti, the father of Haiti, Toussaint Louverture. Really, really interesting. The next book is The Making of Major League by Jonathan Knight, 2015. This is a book about the movie Major League, which is this fictional movie about the Cleveland Indians. And I read the book in one day in a book reading binge. I also met the author at the Rocky River Book Fair in 2015. He also wrote a book on the 1980 Cleveland Browns. This book is about the 1989 movie Major League, about this fictional Cleveland Indians team that made the playoffs. Had guys like Rick Wild Thing Vaughn, played by Charlie Sheen, Willie Mays Hayes, Roger Dorn, Pedro Serrano, Jake Taylor. Supposedly, this movie helped the Indians become great in the 1990s. I cried when I watched it in 1989. It remains extremely popular, a cult classic. It shows because the Indians hadn't made the playoffs since 1954. So at the end of the movie, the movie ends with them making the playoffs. And there were two sequels. Never showed the Indians winning the World Series, which would be a good idea. Although supposedly they might be doing that. And I asked the author about it. He said, yeah, that might happen. And the idea is that this movie, which sort of was positive, that the Cleveland Indians could be a winner, they say that this had an effect on the culture. And then because this came out in 89, and then 1995, the Indians were in the World Series, and some of these things did come true. So it's a very, very interesting book about the making of that really famous movie, a fictional movie about the Cleveland Indians. The next book is Constantinople, City of the World's Desire, 1453 to 1924, by Philip Mansell, 1995. This book has 432 pages. Wow, what a book! So it's about this city from for how many years? 500, close to 500 years. The once eastern capital of the Roman Empire, and then capital of the Greek Byzantine Empire, and then capital of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, now a major city in Turkey. It controls access to the Black Sea, very international. You had Mehmed II, who I believe was a sultan. I think he was the guy who actually conquered what was Constantinople from the Greeks. There were harems, these harems, which were these, actually slaves of the, female slaves of the Sultan, viziers. The viziers these were powerful advisors, I believe. The sultans, who were basically the kings, the janissaries. Now, these guys were military fellows. All the different ethnic peoples that lived in Constantinople: Greeks, Turks, Armenians, Jews, Muslims, Orthodox Christians, Kurds, Arabs, Balkan peoples, Albanians, Bulgarians, Serbs, Croats, Russians, and Austrians. Lots of inter-ethnic cooperation, later hatred, conflict, and separation. A holy city for Orthodox Christians and Muslims. Also a Jewish sanctuary. The Osman family dynasty. And we had a basketball player in Cleveland. He's still with us, Seti Osman, who's must be connected to this. So that's why you got the Ottoman Empire. The name comes from the Osman royal family Turkish family. It was desired by Greeks and Russians, occupied by the British and Allies. So international, so interesting. Sultans were like kings. Focus of British-Russian conflict and the Crimean War. Yeah, this had been, and I think for Greeks now, Greek Americans or Greek, they still consider this to be Greek, because it was Greek at one time, up until 1453 when the Muslim Turks took it. And then, of course, later when and it was the capital of the Ottoman Empire, which was this enormous Muslim empire, which included most of what's now the Middle East, big part of the Balkan Peninsula, into the North Africa, and into what's now Iran, Iraq, Jordan, into Arabia. Very interesting. And all these different ethnic groups they got along. Although the Turks were on top, they had political power, but there were a lot of Greeks, because it had been a Greek area. Armenians. It was sad in the late 1800s when everything fell apart. When this sort of international empire, because the rise of nationalism, the Greeks wanted independence, Armenians as well, and the Balkan peoples. And then you had this rise of ethnic conflict. It was very sad how it all turned out. You had the Armenian genocide, and the real you could say the biggest problem is that it was not democratic. It was a royal family, and the Osman. These sultans from the Osman royal family, they were not good leaders. They became very corrupt, very lazy. They were just occupied with women and sex and food and luxury and not doing a good job. So people wanted better government, and it all fell apart. I really enjoyed this book. It has tremendous history and for a really interesting part of the world and so many different nationalities. Really amazing book. Amazing story. The next book is 59 and 84, Old Hoss Radbourn, Barehanded Baseball, and the Greatest Season a Pitcher Ever Had by Edward Acorn, 2010. This is an outstanding book. It's the story of Old Hoss Radbourn, who won 59 games as a pitcher in Major League Baseball in 1884 and helped the Providence, Rhode Island Grays become the Major League Baseball and National League champions. A two-man pitching rotation. The players didn't have gloves, the old days. So in Old Hoss, he still has the record. It'll never be broken. One guy who won 59 games in one season. Really interesting. It appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find a good history book to read. There's so many amazing history books that have been written, and God bless those authors who work so hard to write these books, which we can enjoy. So anyway, God bless you, take care, and I'll see you next time.